The drought had taken everything from Samuel Pierce, except his stubbornness, and even that was wearing thin as he surveyed the cracked earth of his failing Montana ranch in the scorching summer of 1883. His cattle were down to 30 head, ribs showing through their hides like prison bars, and the creek that had sustained 3 generations of Pierces had dwindled to a muddy trickle. He stood on the porch of the weathered ranch house at dawn, coffee growing cold in his tin cup, and wondered if his father would have known when to quit. Pride was a poison, his mother used to say, and Samuel was drinking deep from that well. The sound of a wagon rattling up the long drive broke his dark thoughts. Samuel squinted against the rising sun, hand instinctively moving to the revolver at his hip. Strangers were rare this far north of town, and rarely brought good news. As the wagon drew closer, he could make out a woman driving, her auburn hair pinned beneath a practical bonnet, her posture straight despite what must have been hours on the rough trail from Sonora. She pulled the horses to a stop in front of the house, and Samuel got his first clear look at her face. She was young, maybe 25 to his 28 years, with green eyes that assessed him as directly as he was assessing her. Her dress was simple but well made, and her hands on the reins showed competence. Something in his chest tightened, and he blamed it on anxiety rather than the more complicated truth. "Mr. Pierce," she called out, her voice clear and unafraid. "That would be me," Samuel said, descending the porch steps slowly. "And you are Delilah Foster. I wrote to you 3 weeks ago about the position." She wrapped the reins around the brake handle and climbed down from the wagon with practiced ease. "Your advertisement in the Helena newspaper said you needed someone who could keep books and manage a household. I can do both, and I am not afraid of hard work." Samuel felt heat creep up his neck. He had placed that advertisement in a moment of desperation, half drunk on whiskey and wholly convinced he could not save the ranch alone. His foreman had quit 2 months ago, taking the last 2 ranch hands with him to more prosperous operations. His housekeeper had followed soon after, murmuring apologies he had not wanted to hear. The advertisement had been a mistake, he had decided the morning after, but apparently his letter withdrawing the offer had not reached Helena in time. "Miss Foster, I am afraid there has been a misunderstanding," he began, but she was already pulling a carpetbag from the wagon bed. "I sold everything I owned to make this trip, Mr. Pierce. The boarding house where I was keeping books burned down 3 weeks ago, and the owner took the insurance money and moved to San Francisco without paying any of us our wages. I have $32 to my name, no family, and nowhere else to go." She said it matter-of-factly without self-pity, her chin raised in defiance of any sympathy he might offer. "Your advertisement promised room, board, and $15 a month. I am here to collect on that promise." Samuel opened his mouth to protest, then closed it again. Something in her eyes reminded him of his own reflection lately, that same desperate determination. He thought of the ledgers sitting on his father's old desk, columns of numbers that added up to failure no matter how many times he recalculated them. He thought of the dust gathering in the house, the meals of beans and hardtack he had been subsisting on, the slowly accumulating evidence of a man giving up. "Can you actually keep books?" he asked finally. "I kept them for the boarding house for 3 years, and before that for my father's dry goods store in St. Louis. I know double-entry bookkeeping, I can write a clear hand, and I can find an error down to the penny." She set her carpetbag down and crossed her arms. "I can also cook, clean, mend, and if necessary, I can shoot. My father taught me before he died. I am not some delicate city flower who will wilt at the first sign of difficulty, Mr. Pierce. If this ranch is failing, then you need someone practical, and I am nothing if not that. The bluntness of her assessment, the casual acknowledgement that his ranch was indeed failing, should have stung. Instead, Samuel found himself almost smiling for the first time in weeks. There was something refreshing about a woman who did not dance around the truth. "The position pays $10 a month," he said. "I cannot afford 15 anymore, and I should tell you honestly, Miss Foster, that there is a good chance this ranch will not survive the year. The drought has been going on for 2 seasons now, cattle prices are down, and I am behind on the mortgage to the bank in town. You would be signing on to a sinking ship." Delilah studied him for a long moment, those green eyes seeing more than he was comfortable with. "Then I suppose we had better figure out how to plug the holes and start bailing, Mr. Pierce. Do we have an agreement?" Against his better judgment, against every practical consideration that said he could not afford even $10 a month, Samuel found himself nodding. "We have an agreement." The room off the kitchen was the housekeeper's. It is not much, but it is private and has a good stove. Meals are included, such as they are. And Miss Foster, you can call me Samuel. If we are going to save a sinking ship together, we might as well be on a first-name basis. For the first time, she smiled, and it transformed her face from merely pretty to genuinely beautiful. "Then you should call me Delilah. Now, would you help me with my trunk? It is heavier than it looks." Samuel helped her carry her belongings into the house, acutely aware of how shabby everything must look through her eyes. The furniture was old, the floors needed scrubbing, and there were gaps in the curtains where the fabric had rotted through. But Delilah did not comment on any of it. She simply set her carpet bag on the narrow bed in the housekeeper's room, looked around with a practical eye, and asked where he kept the ledgers. "Are you not tired from the journey?" Samuel asked. "It is a full day's drive from Sonora." "I slept in the wagon last night rather than pay for a hotel room I could not afford," Delilah said. "I am tired, dusty, and hungry in that order, but if we are going to save this ranch, I need to understand exactly how bad things are. So the ledgers." Samuel showed her to his father's study, a room he had been avoiding lately because it smelled like failure and disappointed ghosts. The ledgers sat on the desk where he had left them, along with a stack of past due notices from various creditors. Delilah sat down, pulled the nearest ledger toward her, and began to read with the focused intensity of a general studying a battlefield. Samuel left her to it and went to see to her horses, unsaddling them and turning them into the corral with his own aging gelding. The animals immediately went for the water trough, which was dangerously low. He would need to haul more water from the creek this afternoon, a chore that took hours and barely kept the livestock watered, much less the kitchen garden or anything else. When he returned to the house, Delilah was still reading, her brow furrowed in concentration. He busied himself in the kitchen, trying to remember the last time he had cooked anything more complicated than beans. There was some bacon left, and eggs from the few chickens still laying. He fried both, made fresh coffee, and carried a plate and cup to the study. "You need to eat," he said, setting them beside her. Delilah looked up, blinking as if surprised to see him. "Thank you. Samuel, these ledgers are actually not as bad as I expected." He barked out a laugh. "You have a strange definition of not bad. You are behind on payments, yes, but your assets still outweigh your debts if we account for land value. The problem is not that the ranch is unprofitable by nature. The problem is the drought and your cattle losses. If we could get through to next spring, rebuild the herd somehow, you might actually have a chance." She took a bite of the bacon, chewed thoughtfully. "What do you know about irrigation?" Samuel blinked at the sudden shift. "I know it takes money I do not have. I have thought about digging channels from the creek, but even if I had the time and labor, there is barely enough water for drinking, much less irrigating fields. What about a windmill? I read an article in a farming journal about new windmill designs that can pump water from deeper wells. If there is groundwater underneath this property, you could tap into it regardless of the drought. That also takes money, Samuel said, but he could not help the flicker of interest in his voice. He had thought about windmills, had even gotten a price quote that had made him laugh bitterly at the impossibility. "How much do you need for the next mortgage payment?" Delilah asked, flipping through the ledger to find the relevant page. $300 by the end of September. That is 2 months away. And if you miss it, the bank will foreclose. The owner has been patient, but he is a businessman, not a charity. Delilah tapped her pencil against her lips, thinking. Samuel tried not to notice the gesture, tried not to notice how the afternoon light streaming through the window caught the red highlights in her hair. He had no business noticing anything about her except her bookkeeping skills. What about your cattle? How much could you get for them if you sold now? Not enough. They are too thin. I would be lucky to get $20 a head, and I need some breeding stock if I am going to rebuild. It is a dead end. Then we need to find another source of income, something fast. Delilah stood up, leaving half her food uneaten, and started pacing. Samuel recognized the energy of someone solving a problem, and he leaned against the doorframe to watch her think. "What skills do you have besides ranching?" The question caught him off guard. "I can break horses. My father taught me before he died, and I am good at it. But there is not much call for it these days with the drought. Nobody is buying horses they cannot afford to feed." "That is not nobody," Delilah said. "That is not many. There is a difference. Tomorrow, I am going into Sonora with you, and we are going to put out the word that you are available for horse breaking at competitive rates. Meanwhile, I am going to look at your supplies and see what I can do about reducing your expenses. We are going to find $300, Samuel, one way or another." Her confidence was either inspiring or delusional. Samuel could not decide which. But it had been a long time since anyone had talked about the future of the ranch as if it had one, and he found himself wanting to believe her. "All right, we will try it your way. But Delilah, if this does not work, if we cannot make that payment, I want you to take what I owe you in wages and leave before the bank comes. I do not want you caught up in the foreclosure." She stopped pacing and looked at him with those disconcertingly direct eyes. "If the ranch fails, Samuel, it will not be because we did not try everything. But it is not going to fail. I did not come all this way to watch a good man lose everything without a fight." Something in his chest clenched again, harder this time, and Samuel had to look away. He was not used to anyone having faith in him, least of all himself these days. "I will hold you to that. Now finish your food before it gets cold. You said you were hungry." They fell into a routine over the next few days that felt simultaneously strange and natural. Delilah woke before dawn and had coffee ready when Samuel came in from checking the cattle. She cooked breakfast while he planned the day's work, and they ate together at the old kitchen table, discussing the ledgers and what needed to be done. Then Samuel would go out to handle the livestock and whatever repairs he could manage alone, while Delilah attacked the house with a determination that was almost frightening. She scrubbed floors, beat rugs, mended curtains, and organized the pantry with military precision. In the evenings, after a simple supper, they would sit in the study and go over the books together, Delilah suggesting small economies here and there that added up. She found a better price on feed from a supplier 2 towns over, negotiated an extension on one of the smaller debts, and wrote letters to contacts she had in St. Louis asking about market prices for cattle and horses. On their first trip into Sonora together, riding the wagon side by side, Samuel found himself acutely aware of her presence in a way that made him uncomfortable. She smelled like lavender and soap, despite the dust of the road, and when the wagon hit a rut and she grabbed his arm for balance, he felt it like a brand through his sleeve. Sonora was a small town, barely more than a main street with a handful of businesses and a church. The bank sat on one corner, a constant reminder of Samuel's debts, while the general store occupied the opposite corner. Samuel pulled up in front of the store and helped Delilah down from the wagon, trying not to notice how her waist felt under his hands. Inside, the store owner, a portly man named George Miller, greeted them with surprise. "Samuel, did not expect to see you in town. And who is this lovely lady?" "Delilah Foster, my new bookkeeper and housekeeper," Samuel said. "Delilah, this is George Miller. He has been selling supplies to the Pierce family since my grandfather's time." "A pleasure," Delilah said, shaking his hand with businesslike efficiency. "Mr. Miller, I am here to discuss Samuel's account. I have been reviewing his purchases, and I notice he has been paying a premium on several items that I know can be had cheaper from bulk suppliers. I would like to negotiate better terms." George's eyebrows shot up, and he glanced at Samuel with something like amusement. "She is direct, is she not?" "That she is," Samuel agreed, fighting a smile. What followed was a masterclass in negotiation. Delilah had prices and alternatives memorized. She knew exactly what the store's margins must be, and she bargained with a combination of charm and ruthlessness that left George sputtering, and finally agreeing to a 10% reduction on future purchases. When they walked out, Samuel was shaking his head in admiration. "Where did you learn to do that?" "My father's store. He used to take me with him when he negotiated with suppliers. He said a man would often give a better price to a young woman than to another man because it did not feel like losing." She glanced at him, a hint of mischief in her eyes. Was I too forward? I know some men do not like women handling business. "If you can save me money by being forward, be as forward as you want," Samuel said. He meant it. There was something exhilarating about watching her work, about having someone competent at his side. He had been alone for so long that he had forgotten what partnership felt like. They put the word out about Samuel's horse breaking services at the saloon, the livery, and with the town's only lawyer, who seemed to know everyone's business. Then they bought supplies with their newly negotiated discount and headed back to the ranch. On the way home, as the sun was setting over the distant mountains, Delilah said quietly, "Thank you for giving me a chance, Samuel. I know you did not really want to hire anyone." "I am starting to think it was the smartest thing I have done in months," Samuel admitted. "You have done more in 3 days than I managed in the previous 3 months. That is because you were doing it alone. Everything is harder alone." She was quiet for a moment, then added, "I was alone in Helena after the boarding house burned. I did not realize how hard it had become until I was not anymore." Samuel understood that better than she knew. He had been alone since his father died 2 years ago, and even more alone after his mother followed 6 months later, her heart broken by the loss. He had convinced himself he preferred it that way, that needing people only led to disappointment. But having Delilah in the house, having someone to talk to over meals and someone to plan with in the evenings, he was remembering what he had been missing. "I am glad you came," he said, and meant it more than was probably wise. She smiled at him, and in the fading light she looked almost ethereal. "So am I." The first horse arrived a week later, a half-wild Mustang stallion that a rancher from the next county needed broken for breeding. The man, a grizzled old-timer named Hank Turson, looked skeptical when he saw Samuel's operation, but desperation made people flexible. He needed the horse broken, and Samuel's prices were lower than the breaker over in Helena. "You sure you can handle him?" Hank asked as they unloaded the stallion into the corral. The horse was fighting every step, eyes rolling white with fear and fury. He has thrown every man who has tried to ride him so far. I can handle him, Samuel said, with more confidence than he felt. It had been months since he had broken a horse, and this one looked like a handful. But they needed the money, and he could not afford to show doubt. Delilah watched from the porch as Samuel entered the corral. She had wanted to help, but he had asked her to stay back, not wanting her in danger if things went wrong. Now he regretted it, because her presence was oddly steadying, and he could have used that. The first hour was all about establishing communication. Samuel did not believe in the brutal breaking methods some men used, all whips and spurs and domination. His father had taught him that a truly broken horse was useless, that what you wanted was a partnership between horse and rider, a mutual respect. So he started slow, letting the stallion run himself tired while Samuel stood in the center of the corral just existing, showing he was not a threat. Eventually, the horse stopped running and stood at the far side of the corral, sides heaving, watching Samuel with those wild eyes. Samuel turned his back, a gesture of trust, and waited. It took another 20 minutes, but finally, curiosity overcame fear, and the stallion took a step toward him. Then another. Samuel remained still, his heart pounding but his body language relaxed. When the horse's nose finally touched his shoulder, Samuel spoke softly, praising him, and carefully reached up to scratch the sweet spot behind his ear. The stallion flinched but did not bolt. They stood like that for a long time, horse and man, learning each other's language. By the time Hank left that evening, promising to return in a week, Samuel was exhausted but satisfied. The real work would come over the next several days, but he had made first contact, and that was the hardest part. Delilah had supper waiting when he came in, and she had heated water for a bath, a luxury he had not bothered with in weeks. He washed the dust and sweat off, changed into clean clothes, and found her setting the table. "That was impressive," she said. "I have never seen anyone work with a horse like that. Most men I knew just beat them into submission. My father hated that method. He said a beaten horse might obey, but it would never trust, and without trust, you did not really have anything." Samuel sat down, suddenly aware of how hungry he was. "It takes longer, but the results are better. At least, that is the theory. We will see if it works with this one." "It will work. I could see the horse responding to you even from the porch." Delilah served him a plate of stew, thicker and more flavorful than anything he had managed to cook for himself. She had somehow made his meager supplies stretch into something approaching a proper meal. "Samuel, I have been thinking about the ranch's long-term prospects." He had learned that when Delilah said she had been thinking, it meant she had been planning, calculating, and probably solving problems he had not even identified yet. "Tell me, even if we make this mortgage payment, and even if we make the next few, you are barely breaking even. The ranch cannot thrive just by surviving. You need to expand, diversify your income. Have you ever considered taking in wild horses and breaking them for sale? There is a market for well-trained mounts, especially with the cavalry and the stagecoach companies. If you could break a dozen horses a year at good prices, that would be steady income on top of the cattle." It was not a new idea. Samuel had thought about it before his father died. But it required capital to get started, fencing for multiple corrals, feed for the horses while they were being trained, and time he had not had while trying to keep the ranch from collapsing. "It is a good idea, but it would take investment, money I do not have. What if we could find investors? Or what if we started very small, just 1 or 2 horses at a time, and reinvested the profits?" Delilah leaned forward, her eyes bright with enthusiasm. I have been calculating, and if we are frugal, really frugal, we might be able to save enough from the horse breaking and the reduced household expenses to buy our first wild horse by the end of the year. Then you break it, sell it for a profit, and use that to buy two more. In 3 years, you could have a real secondary business. 3 years. Samuel had not been thinking in terms of years lately. He had been thinking in terms of weeks, days, hours until the next crisis. The idea of planning 3 years into the future felt almost foreign, and yet Delilah spoke about it as if it were a certainty. "You really think we can do this?" he asked. "I think we can try. And trying is more than you were doing before I got here." She said it without judgment, just stating fact. "Samuel, I have watched you this past week. You are good at what you do. You have the skills to make this ranch work. What you did not have was help and hope. Now you have both." Something in his chest expanded, warm and dangerous. He looked at her across the table, her red hair escaping its pins after a long day. Her sleeves rolled up showing strong forearms, her face flushed from the heat of the stove, and he thought she was the most beautiful thing he had ever seen. Not beautiful in a delicate, ornamental way, but beautiful in the way of something essential, something you did not realize you needed until it was there. "Thank you," he said, his voice rougher than he intended, "for believing in this, in me." Delilah met his eyes and something passed between them, an understanding, an acknowledgement of the thing neither of them was ready to name yet. "We are in this together now, Samuel. Your success is my success. That is what partnership means." Over the following weeks, the partnership deepened into something that felt increasingly dangerous to Samuel's peace of mind. They worked together seamlessly, anticipating each other's needs, falling into rhythms that felt older than the short time they had known each other. When he came in from the fields, she had cold water waiting. When she needed something from a high shelf, he was there to reach it before she could ask. They talked over meals, sharing stories from their pasts, and he learned that Delilah had lost her mother young and had essentially run her father's household and business until his death left her alone and penniless. "I think that is why the boarding house work appealed to me," she said one evening as they sat on the porch watching the sunset. "It was familiar, keeping house, managing accounts, making sure everything ran smoothly. It was what I knew how to do." "You are good at it," Samuel said. "Better than good. I think you could run an entire hotel if you set your mind to it. Maybe someday." She smiled, that hint of mischief back in her eyes. "But for now, I am content with a failing ranch in Montana." "Not failing," Samuel corrected. "Recovering." "Recovering," she agreed, and the word felt like a promise. The Mustang stallion was gentled by the end of the week, not fully broken but willing to accept a saddle and rider without trying to kill anyone. Hank returned with the payment, $60 that felt like a fortune, and immediately asked if Samuel could take on another horse. Word was spreading that Pierce had his father's touch with difficult animals, and people were taking notice. By mid-August, Samuel had 3 horses in various stages of training and a waiting list of 2 more. The income was not enough to save the ranch by itself, but combined with Delilah's ruthless economizing, it was making a difference. She had started a kitchen garden using precious water from the creek, had gotten the chickens laying more regularly with some trick involving their feed schedule, and had even found a buyer for some of the ranch's old equipment that was cluttering the barn. The ledgers, which had been a source of dread, became something they looked at together with cautious optimism. They were still behind, still scrambling, but the numbers were moving in the right direction. Delilah had calculated that if everything went perfectly, they might have $280 by the end of September, just 20 short of what they needed. "We will find it," she said firmly when Samuel pointed out the shortfall. We still have time. But time was running out, and they both knew it. Samuel started taking on riskier jobs, breaking horses other trainers had refused because they were too dangerous. Delilah protested, worried about his safety, but he waved her off. They needed the money, and he was willing to take the chances. It was one of those risky jobs that finally forced them to confront what had been growing between them since the day she arrived. A rancher brought in a mare that had been beaten by her previous owner, and now attacked anyone who came near. The rancher wanted her broken or put down, and Samuel had agreed to try, even though Delilah had begged him not to. The mare was unpredictable, traumatized, and had already put 2 men in the doctor's care. Samuel spent 3 days working with her, slow and patient, trying to show her that not all humans meant harm. On the 3rd day, he got careless, distracted by worry about money and the approaching deadline, and the mare caught him with a kick to the ribs that sent him flying across the corral. He heard Delilah scream, heard her running, and then everything went black for a moment when he came to. He was lying on his back in the dirt, pain radiating through his chest, and Delilah was kneeling beside him, her face white with terror. "Do not move. I am getting the doctor." "No doctor," Samuel managed through gritted teeth. "Doctors cost money they did not have. Just help me to the house." "Samuel, you could have broken ribs. You need a doctor." "I have had broken ribs before. I just need rest." He tried to sit up and immediately regretted it as pain lanced through his side. Delilah caught him, surprisingly strong for her size, and helped him stand. Together they staggered to the house, the mare forgotten in the corral. Delilah got him to his bed, pulled off his shirt with shaking hands, and examined his ribs with gentle fingers that still made him wince. "They might be cracked. You need to rest, Samuel. No work for at least a week, maybe more." "We do not have a week. The payment is due in 3 weeks, and I still have 2 horses to finish." He tried to sit up again, and she pushed him back down with more force than he expected. "You are no good to anyone dead or permanently injured. The horses can wait. The payment can wait. You matter more than any of that." Her voice was fierce, and when he looked up at her, he saw tears tracking down her cheeks. "You understand me, Samuel Pierce. You matter." Something in him broke at those words, at the sight of her crying over him. He reached up, ignoring the pain in his ribs, and cupped her face with his hand. "Delilah." She caught her breath, her eyes searching his. "What?" "I think I am falling in love with you." He said it simply, too hurt and too tired to hide behind propriety or caution. "I think I have been falling since the day you showed up and refused to take no for an answer." Delilah made a sound halfway between a laugh and a sob. "You are definitely delirious from the pain." "No, I am clear-headed for the first time in months." He traced his thumb along her cheekbone, wiping away a tear. "You came here and you gave me a reason to fight. Not just for the ranch, but for something more, for a future, for us." "Us," she repeated as if testing the word. Then she leaned down and kissed him, soft and careful, mindful of his injuries. When she pulled back, she was smiling through her tears. "I have been falling too. I tried not to. It seemed impractical given the circumstances. But you are very hard not to fall for, Samuel Pierce." He wanted to pull her back down, to kiss her properly, but his ribs had other ideas and he groaned in pain. Delilah immediately switched from lover back to nurse, fussing over him, insisting he drink some willow bark tea for the pain, and threatening dire consequences if he tried to get up before she said he was ready. "You are very bossy when you are worried," Samuel observed. "You have seen nothing yet. Now drink your tea and rest. I am going to take care of that mare." "Delilah, no, she is dangerous." "So am I when someone I love is hurt." She said it casually, as if she had not just admitted she loved him. "I watched what you did with the stallion. I can do this. Trust me." Samuel wanted to protest, but the truth was he did trust her. More than that, he believed in her. "All right, but if she even looks at you wrong, you get out of that corral, promise me." "I promise." She kissed him again, quickly, and then she was gone, leaving him alone with his aching ribs and his suddenly racing heart. Through the window, Samuel could see Delilah approaching the corral where the traumatized mare paced nervously. She did not enter immediately, just stood outside, talking in a low, calm voice. Samuel could not hear the words, but he could see the effect. The mare's ears swiveled toward Delilah, listening. After a while, Delilah slipped into the corral and stood still, the same technique Samuel had used with the stallion. Waiting, patient, non-threatening. It took hours, but Samuel watched through the window as Delilah gradually won the mare's trust. She never rushed, never forced. When the mare finally approached, Delilah spent a long time just standing there, letting the horse investigate, proving she meant no harm. By sunset, Delilah was stroking the mare's neck, and the horse was leaning into the touch like a cat. When Delilah finally came back inside, she was dusty and exhausted, but there was triumph in her eyes. She is going to be all right. She just needed to remember that humans can be kind. Sometimes we all need that reminder. Samuel, who had managed to sit up in bed despite the pain, held out his hand. Delilah took it and sat beside him, careful not to jostle him. "You were amazing out there. I learned from the best." She squeezed his hand. "How are you feeling?" "Like I got kicked by a horse," he admitted. "But better now that you are here." They sat in comfortable silence as the light faded outside, hands linked, both aware that something fundamental had shifted between them. Finally, Delilah said, "Samuel, about what you said earlier, about falling in love. Did you mean it, or was that the pain talking?" "I meant every word. I love you, Delilah Foster. I know it is fast, and I know the timing is terrible, and I have nothing to offer you but a failing ranch and uncertain future. But I love you, and I needed you to know that." Delilah leaned her head against his shoulder, gently enough not to hurt him. "I love you too. And you are wrong about one thing. The timing is not terrible. I think I showed up exactly when I was supposed to, exactly when we both needed someone to believe in us. That seems like perfect timing to me." Samuel kissed the top of her head, breathing in the lavender scent of her hair. And for the first time in 2 years, he felt something like peace. The ranch was still in danger. They were still short on money, and his ribs hurt like blazes, but none of that mattered as much as the woman beside him, and the future they might build together. He was forced to rest for the next 5 days, and it nearly drove him mad. Delilah took over the horse training with a confidence that would have surprised him if he had not already seen her in action. She finished working with the mare, who transformed under her patient care into a gentle, willing mount. The rancher was so impressed when he came to collect her that he paid double the agreed price and promised to send more business their way. Delilah also kept up with the household, the garden, the chickens, and the books, somehow managing everything while still finding time to sit with Samuel in the evenings and talk about their plans. He realized, watching her, that she was not just competent, she was extraordinary. And she had chosen him, chosen this struggling ranch and uncertain future when she could have kept looking for something safer. "Why did you really stay?" he asked one evening. "That first day when I told you about the debts and the failing ranch, you could have asked me to take you back to town. You could have found another position, something more secure. Why did you stay?" Delilah was quiet for a moment, her fingers tracing idle patterns on his hand. "Do you remember when I said I had nowhere else to go? That was true, but it was not the whole truth. I had options. There are always options. I could have found work as a shop girl or gone to one of the bigger cities and looked for another bookkeeping position. But when I was standing in front of you that first day, Looking at this ranch and looking at you, I saw something that felt like home. And I had been homeless for a long time, Samuel. Not just since the boarding house burned, but since my father died and I realized I was completely alone in the world. So I stayed because something in me recognized something in you, and I thought maybe, just maybe, we could save each other. Samuel pulled her closer, ignoring the twinge in his ribs. You did save me. I had given up before you arrived, I just had not admitted it yet. You gave me a reason to keep fighting. We saved each other then, Delilah said softly. That seems like a good foundation for whatever comes next. What came next was the end of September and the looming mortgage payment. Despite all their efforts, all the horse breaking and economizing and creative problem-solving, they were still $30 short. Samuel counted the money 3 times, hoping he had miscalculated, but the number did not change. $270, 30 short of what they needed. We could ask for an extension, Delilah suggested, but they both knew it was a long shot. The bank had been patient already, more patient than they had any right to expect. Or I could sell the last of the breeding cattle, Samuel said, even though the thought made him feel sick. Without breeding stock, he would have no way to rebuild the herd, no future for the ranch beyond the next few months. No, we are not sacrificing the future to save the present. There has to be another way. Delilah was pacing again, that telltale sign she was thinking hard. What about my jewelry? I have my mother's wedding ring and a few other pieces. They are not worth much, but maybe we could get something for them. Absolutely not. Those are your only connection to your family. Samuel caught her hand as she paced past, pulling her to a stop. We will figure something out, we always do. But the next morning, when Samuel went to check on the cattle, he found something that made his blood run cold. 3 of his best breeding cows were missing, and there were tracks leading away from the ranch, heading north toward rougher country where rustlers were known to operate. He had been so focused on the mortgage that he had neglected basic security, and now he was paying for it. Delilah found him standing in the empty pasture, staring at the tracks, his face grim. What happened? Rustlers. Took 3 of the breeding cows sometime during the night. He turned to her, anger and frustration warring in his chest. Those cows were worth at least $40 each. That is $120 gone, more than what we needed for the payment. Without them, even if we make this payment, we have no hope of rebuilding the herd. Then we go after them. Delilah's voice was calm, decided. Delilah, these are dangerous men. I will ride into Sonora, get the sheriff, and we will track them properly. By the time you get to town and back with the sheriff, the trail will be cold and the cows will be sold or slaughtered. You know that. We need to go now together. She was already walking toward the house, purpose in every step. You taught me to shoot, remember, and I am a better tracker than you think. My father used to take me hunting. Samuel wanted to argue, wanted to insist she stay where it was safe, but he knew she was right. Every hour they delayed decreased their chances of recovering the cattle, and if he was honest with himself, he was grateful not to face this alone. His ribs were still tender, not fully healed, and having someone watching his back might mean the difference between success and disaster. They saddled 2 horses, packed supplies for a day's ride, and armed themselves. Samuel took his rifle and revolver, while Delilah carried her father's old shotgun and a determined look that would have been intimidating on a less beautiful woman. Together, they set out following the tracks north. The trail led them into rough country, rocky and arid, the kind of landscape that swallowed evidence and hid secrets. But the rustlers had been moving fast, not expecting pursuit so soon, and they had left enough sign for Samuel to follow. After 3 hours of hard riding, they spotted dust in the distance and knew they were getting close. "We need a plan," Delilah said as they paused behind a rocky outcrop to assess the situation. Samuel studied the terrain ahead. The rustlers appeared to be stopped in a small canyon, probably resting the stolen cattle before pushing them further north. He could see 2 men, maybe 3, which meant they were outnumbered but not overwhelmingly so. "We have the advantage of surprise. If we can position ourselves on the high ground, we can cover them with the rifles and convince them to give up the cattle without a fight. And if they do not want to give them up without a fight, then we convince them more forcefully." Samuel checked his rifle, making sure it was loaded. "But I would rather avoid shooting if possible. Even justified killing brings questions and complications we do not need." They split up, circling to either side of the canyon to get into position. Samuel took the left, where he had a clear view of the rustlers' camp, while Delilah climbed the rocks to the right, her shotgun ready. When they were both in position, Samuel called out, his voice echoing off the canyon walls. "You men down there, those are my cattle you stole. I am giving you one chance to leave them and ride out." The rustlers scrambled for their weapons, but they were caught in the open, exposed on both sides. One of them, a mean-looking character with a scar across his cheek, called back, "There are 3 of us and one of you. I do not like your odds." "You are wrong about the count," Delilah's voice rang out from the other side of the canyon, clear and calm. "There are 2 of us and we have you in a crossfire. You can leave alive or you can try your luck. Your choice." There was a tense moment of silence, and Samuel could see the rustlers weighing their options. Then one of them, younger and clearly less committed to dying over stolen cattle, threw down his gun. "I am out. This is not worth getting killed over." The other 2 hesitated, but eventually the scarred man cursed and dropped his weapon as well. All right, we are leaving. You did not have to be so unfriendly about it." Samuel kept his rifle trained on them as they mounted their horses and rode out of the canyon, leaving the stolen cattle behind. Only when they were well out of sight did he lower the weapon and let out the breath he had been holding. Delilah climbed down from her perch and joined him, and they checked on the cattle, making sure they were unharmed. "That was well done," Samuel said, admiration clear in his voice. "You stayed calm, you got into position without being seen, and you played the part perfectly." "Where did you learn to bluff like that?" "Who says I was bluffing?" Delilah patted her shotgun affectionately. "My father did not teach me to shoot just for show. I can hit what I aim at, Samuel Pierce. I just prefer not to have to." They drove the cattle back to the ranch, arriving well after dark, exhausted but triumphant. The crisis had been averted, but it had not solved their fundamental problem. They still needed $30, and they had no idea where to find it. The solution came from an unexpected source. 2 days before the payment was due, a well-dressed man rode up to the ranch in a fancy buggy. He introduced himself as Charles Whitmore, a horse breeder from Helena, and said he had heard about Samuel's skill with difficult horses. "I have a proposition for you, Mr. Pierce. I have a 3-year-old stallion with excellent bloodlines, but he is too wild to be of use to me. I have tried 3 different breakers, and none of them could handle him. I am willing to pay you $100 if you can have him ready to sell within a month." Samuel's heart leaped at the figure, more than enough to cover what they needed and then some, but he forced himself to be cautious. "That is generous. Why so much?" "Because if you can break him properly, I can sell him for 5 times that to a buyer who wants him for breeding. But if you fail, the horse is useless to me. So the risk is yours, but the reward is substantial. Do we have a deal?" Samuel glanced at Delilah, who had come out onto the porch to see who was visiting. She gave him a small nod, trusting his judgment. He turned back to Whitmore. "We have a deal. Bring the horse tomorrow, and I will get started." Whitmore left a deposit of $30, enough to make the mortgage payment, and promised to return with the stallion the next day. After he drove away, Samuel and Delilah stood in the yard, hardly daring to believe their luck. "That was almost too convenient," Delilah said. "Do you think he is legitimate? His name is known in the horse breeding circles, and the deposit is real money. I think he is exactly what he seems, someone who needs a particular skill and is willing to pay for it." Samuel pulled her into a careful hug, mindful of his still tender ribs. "We did it, Delilah. We made the payment. The ranch is safe for another few months. We did it," she agreed, hugging him back. "And we will keep doing it, one challenge at a time, until this ranch is not just surviving but thriving." That night, after they made the trip to town and paid the bank, after they celebrated with a better supper than they had allowed themselves in weeks, Samuel and Delilah sat on the porch and watched the stars come out over the Montana plains. The air was finally cooling as September gave way to October, and there was the promise of rain in the distant clouds. "Delilah, I want to ask you something, and I will understand if it is too soon or if you say no." Samuel took her hand, nervous in a way he had not been even facing down rustlers. "Would you consider marrying me? Not someday when things are more stable, but soon. I know we have only known each other a few months, and I know this is not the most romantic proposal, but I love you and I want to build this future with you as my wife, not just my bookkeeper and housekeeper." Delilah turned to look at him, her eyes shining in the starlight. "Samuel Pierce, are you proposing to me while sitting on this porch in our work clothes without even a ring to offer?" His heart sank. She was right, it was too soon, too unromantic, too presumptuous. "I am sorry, I should have waited, should have done this properly. Stop apologizing," she laughed, a sound of pure joy. "I was teasing you. Yes, I will marry you. I will marry you tomorrow if you want. I do not need a fancy ring or a grand gesture. I just need you, and this ranch, and the life we are building together." Samuel kissed her then, properly this time, without worrying about his ribs or propriety or anything except the woman in his arms and the overwhelming gratitude. He felt that she had knocked on his door all those weeks ago, and refused to leave. When they finally broke apart, both breathless, he rested his forehead against hers. "I promise I will buy you a ring when we can afford it, and a proper wedding dress, and anything else you want." "I have everything I want already," Delilah said, "but I will not say no to a ring eventually. Something practical that will not get in the way when I am working." They were married 3 weeks later in the small church in Sonora, with George Miller and his wife as witnesses. Delilah wore a simple dress she had made herself from fabric she traded for some of her preserves, and Samuel wore his father's old suit, carefully mended where moths had gotten to it. The ceremony was short, the reception was shorter, just cake and coffee at the Miller's house, but none of that mattered. What mattered was the moment the preacher pronounced them husband and wife, and Samuel kissed his bride in front of God and the handful of friends they had made in town. The ride back to the ranch, as Mr. and Mrs. Pierce, felt like coming home in a way that moving back to the ranch after his parents died never had. This was his home now, theirs together, and every board of the house and acre of land meant more because Delilah was beside him. That night, they consummated their marriage in Samuel's room, now their room, with a tenderness that turned to passion and back to tenderness again. Afterward, lying tangled in the sheets, Delilah traced the scar on Samuel's shoulder from an old roping accident. "Tell me everything," she said. "All the stories, all the history. I want to know every part of you." So Samuel told her about growing up on the ranch, about learning to ride before he could walk, about his father's stern lessons in ranching and his mother's softer lessons in compassion. He told her about the year the creek flooded, and they lost half the herd, and the year of plenty when they had more calves than they knew what to do with. He told her about his parents' death, the grief that had nearly broken him, and the slow realization that he was alone and failing at everything his family had built. In turn, Delilah told him about St. Louis, about her father's dry goods store and how she had loved the smell of new fabric and the satisfaction of a balanced ledger. She told him about her mother's death when she was 12, and how she had stepped into the role of running the household without complaint because her father needed her. She told him about the fire that took the store, the fever that took her father, and the lonely years that followed, working for people who did not appreciate her and dreaming of something more. "I used to imagine what it would be like to have my own place," she said. "Somewhere I belonged, where I was not just hired help but actually part of something. When I saw your advertisement, it felt like maybe that place existed after all." "You belong here," Samuel said, kissing her temple. "You have belonged here from the moment you climbed down from that wagon and told me you were not leaving. This is your ranch now too, Delilah. Everything I have is yours." They made love again, slower this time, learning each other's bodies and the sounds each other made in pleasure. When they finally slept, wrapped in each other's arms, Samuel felt a contentment he had not known was possible. The next months were not easy, but they were good. The stallion from Charles Whitmore proved to be a challenge, taking nearly the full month to break properly. But Samuel managed it and collected the $100 with pride. Whitmore was so impressed that he sent 2 more horses, spreading the word that Pierce was the man to see for difficult animals. The horse-breaking business grew steadily through the winter. While Samuel could not work as many horses in the coldest months, he had enough saved to buy wild Mustangs at the government auctions and start the business Delilah had proposed, breaking them over the winter and selling them in the spring for good profits. Delilah handled all the paperwork, the contracts, the finances, freeing Samuel to focus on the actual training. They fell into a partnership that was part business, part marriage, and wholly satisfying. They worked hard during the day and fell into bed exhausted at night, but there was joy in it, the joy of building something together. On Sundays, they would take the day off, riding out to check the boundaries of the ranch or simply sitting on the porch and enjoying the peace. In February, Delilah announced she was pregnant. Samuel had been in the barn when she told him, and he actually whooped with joy, swinging her around despite her laughing protests. They spent that evening talking about names and futures, about whether they wanted sons or daughters, and how they would raise them to love the ranch as much as they did. "I want them to grow up knowing they belong here," Delilah said, her hand resting on her still flat stomach. "I want them to have the security we did not have, the knowledge that this is their home and always will be. Then we will make sure this ranch is strong enough to pass on to them," Samuel promised. "We will build it into something that can support generations of Pierces." The baby, a boy they named James after Samuel's father, was born in October of 1884, exactly 1 year after they had met. The birth was long and difficult, and Samuel spent hours pacing the kitchen while the doctor from Sonora attended Delilah in their bedroom. When he finally heard the baby's cry, he sank into a chair with relief so profound it left him shaking. The doctor emerged, tired but smiling. "You have a healthy son, Mr. Pierce, and your wife is a fighter. She came through it well." Samuel was allowed into the bedroom to find Delilah propped up against the pillows, exhausted but radiant, holding a tiny bundle wrapped in the quilt his mother had made. She looked up at him with tears in her eyes. "Come meet your son." He sat carefully on the edge of the bed and looked down at the baby, at the tiny perfect face and miniature fingers, and felt his heart expand in a way he had not known was possible. "He is beautiful. You are amazing. We made this," Delilah said, wonder in her voice. "We made this perfect little person, and he is going to grow up on this ranch we saved together. That is pretty incredible when you think about it." James was a healthy, happy baby who fit into their lives with surprising ease. Delilah proved to be a natural mother, somehow managing to care for an infant while still keeping the books and helping Samuel with the business. They hired a young woman from town, the daughter of the doctor, to help with the household so Delilah would not be overwhelmed. And slowly, their operation grew more professional, more established. By the spring of 1885, the ranch was not just surviving but beginning to thrive. The drought had broken the previous year. The creek was running full again, and Samuel's cattle herd was up to 60 head with more calves on the way. The horse-breaking business was bringing in steady money, and they had attracted attention from buyers as far away as Wyoming and the Dakota Territory. Samuel built a new barn that summer, bigger and more solid than the old one, with proper stalls for the horses he was training. Delilah started talking about eventually building a new house, something larger and more modern, though Samuel was fond of the old place with all its memories. "We can keep this house for guests or for hired hands once we have enough business to need them," she suggested one evening as they rocked on the porch, James sleeping in Delilah's arms. "But imagine what we could build with planning and proper funds. A house with multiple bedrooms for more children, a proper office for the business, maybe even running water pumped in from a well." "More children," Samuel raised an eyebrow. "You have already decided James is getting siblings." "Of course. I do not want him growing up alone like we did. I want him to have brothers and sisters, people who will always be on his side no matter what." She looked down at the sleeping baby with so much love it made Samuel's chest tight. "I want this ranch full of life and laughter." Samuel reached over and took her free hand. "Then that is what we will have. As many children as you want, a new house, whatever you dream up, we will build it all together." And they did. Over the next 5 years, the Pierce Ranch became one of the most successful operations in that part of Montana. Samuel's reputation as a horse breaker spread, and he had contracts lined up months in advance. They built the new house in 1887, a spacious 2-story structure with a proper office and 4 bedrooms, keeping the old house for the hired hands they now employed year-round. Delilah gave birth to a daughter, Margaret, in 1886, and another son, Robert, in 1888. The house was indeed full of life and laughter, with children running through it and the sounds of a working ranch all around. Samuel taught each child to ride almost as soon as they could walk, and Delilah taught them their letters and numbers, determined they would have the education she and Samuel had lacked. The mortgage was paid off entirely in 1889, a day they celebrated by hosting a gathering for everyone in Sonora who had helped them along the way. George Miller gave a toast to the stubbornness and vision of the Pierces, and the preacher who had married them said they were an example of what faith and hard work could accomplish. That night, after the guests had gone home and the children were asleep, Samuel and Delilah stood on the porch of their new house, looking out over the ranch they had built together. The corrals were full of horses in various stages of training, the pastures were full of healthy cattle, and in the distance, the creek ran full and clear under the Montana moon. "You remember that first day?" Samuel asked, his arm around Delilah's waist. "When you showed up in that wagon and informed me you were not leaving. I remember you tried to send me away, and I told you we were going to save this ranch together." Delilah leaned into him, comfortable and content. I was so scared that day. I had gambled everything on a newspaper advertisement, and when I saw how bad things were, I almost lost my nerve. What changed your mind? You did. You were honest about how bad it was, but you did not make excuses. You had gotten knocked down, but you were not broken. I looked at you and thought, there is a man worth taking a chance on. She turned in his arms to face him. Best decision I ever made. Samuel kissed her, still as in love with her as he had been that day in his bedroom when a horse had kicked him and fear for his life had forced him to admit his feelings. More in love, actually, because now he knew all her strengths and quirks, all the ways she was brilliant and stubborn and kind. He knew the way she hummed when she was doing the books, the way she always woke before dawn no matter how late they stayed up, the way she loved their children with a fierceness that was beautiful to witness. "I love you," he said, simple and true. "Thank you for saving me, for giving me a reason to fight." "We saved each other," Delilah corrected, as she always did. "That is what love does. It gives us reasons to be better, to try harder, to believe in futures we could not imagine alone." They had 2 more children in the following years, twins born in 1891, a boy and a girl they named Sarah and Samuel Jr. The house was full to bursting with children and noise, and the controlled chaos of a working ranch that was also a thriving family business. As the years passed, Samuel and Delilah grew into their roles not just as ranchers, but as pillars of the community. They employed local young people, teaching them skills and giving them opportunities they might not have had otherwise. They were generous with their neighbors, helping out during hard times because they remembered what it was like to be the ones struggling. And they loved each other with the kind of deep, abiding affection that came from weathering storms together and coming out stronger. On their 10th wedding anniversary in 1893, Samuel finally bought Delilah the ring he had promised her all those years ago. It was not a fancy diamond. She had been very clear she did not want something impractical, but a gold band with a small emerald that matched her eyes. He presented it to her over dinner at the hotel in Sonora, the whole family dressed in their best for the occasion. "It is beautiful," Delilah said, slipping it onto her finger beside her simple wedding band. "But you know the ring I treasure most is this one." She touched the wedding band he had bought her with money they could barely spare, the simple gold circle that represented promises made when they had nothing but hope and determination. "I know," Samuel said, taking her hand and kissing it. "But I wanted you to have something that reflected what we have built together, something that shows the world how much I value you." "The world already knows how much we value each other," Delilah said, gesturing to their children, to the life they had created. "But I will wear it gladly and think of you every time I see it." James, at 9 years old and already showing signs of his father's skill with horses, raised his glass of lemonade in a toast. "To Ma and Pa, the best parents and ranchers in all of Montana." The other children echoed the toast, even the twins who did not really understand what they were cheering for, but enjoyed the excitement. Samuel looked around the table at his family, at his beautiful wife who was still making his heart race after a decade of marriage, at his children who were healthy and happy and growing up with the security he had wanted for them, and felt profound gratitude for the day Delilah Foster had shown up at his failing ranch and refused to leave. That night, lying in bed in the house they had built together, Delilah said, "You know what I think about sometimes? What would have happened if I had not seen your advertisement, or if I had taken that position as a shop girl in Helena instead? We would have missed each other completely, lived our whole lives not knowing what we could have had together." "I do not like thinking about that," Samuel admitted. "It feels like imagining a world without color or music, something essential missing. But we did find each other." Against all odds, across all that distance, we found exactly what we needed exactly when we needed it most. She rolled over to face him, her hand on his chest over his heart. That has to mean something. It means we were lucky, Samuel said, or blessed, or maybe both. It means we were brave enough to take a chance when it mattered most. You were brave enough to let me stay when you wanted to send me away. I was brave enough to believe in a future that looked impossible. We were both brave enough to admit we were falling in love even though the timing was terrible and we had no guarantee things would work out. Delilah kissed him softly. Being brave enough to love someone, really love them and build a life with them, that is the hardest and most important thing we can do. Samuel gathered her close, thinking about the years they had shared and the years still to come. His ribs had long since healed from that kick, but sometimes he thought he still felt an echo of it, a reminder of the moment he had admitted his love for her out loud. That moment of pain and vulnerability had led to everything good in his life since. "I would do it all again," he said. Every struggle, every worry, every moment of not knowing if we would make it. I would do it all again because it led to this, to you, to our family. So would I, Delilah agreed, though maybe next time with slightly fewer near-death experiences and rustler confrontations. They laughed together, comfortable in the way of long married couples who knew each other's stories by heart but never tired of hearing them. Outside, the Montana wind whispered through the prairie grass, and somewhere in the distance, a horse whinnied. The sounds of the ranch settling for the night, sounds that meant home and safety, and the life they had fought so hard to build. As Samuel drifted off to sleep, Delilah's head on his shoulder and the knowledge of his children safe in their beds down the hall, he thought about how close he had come to losing it all, and how one determined woman with $32 and nowhere else to go had changed everything. The ranch had been failing, she had arrived, and she had given him not just a reason to fight but a reason to live, to hope, to dream of futures that seemed impossible. And those dreams had all come true, not through luck or magic, but through love, partnership, and the shared determination to build something lasting. The ranch his great-grandfather had established was now secure for his children and grandchildren to come. The legacy was not just land and cattle and horses, but the story of two people who had found each other when they both needed saving, who had saved each other, and who had built a love story that would echo through generations. Years continued to pass in contentment and prosperity. The children grew, and as they did, each found their own place in the ranch operation. James, true to his early promise, became an exceptional horseman and took over much of the breaking business from his father. Margaret showed a head for numbers that rivaled her mother's and began handling more of the business side as Delilah started to slow down. Robert loved the cattle and spent his time learning everything about breeding and herd management. The twins, still young but already showing distinct personalities, delighted everyone with their energy and enthusiasm for ranch life. In 1895, when Samuel was 40 years old and Delilah was 37, they sat on the porch of their home one Sunday afternoon watching their children play in the yard. James was teaching the twins to rope a practice dummy while Margaret helped her mother with some mending, and Robert read a book about modern ranching techniques. "We did good," Samuel said, a statement rather than a question. "We did very good," Delilah agreed, setting aside her mending to take his hand. Her fingers, which had been soft when she first arrived at the ranch, were now calloused from years of work, but Samuel thought they were the most beautiful hands in the world because of what they had built together. "Do you have any regrets? Anything you wish had been different?" Delilah considered the question seriously. "I wish I had more time with my parents, but that is not something we could control. I wish the early years had not been quite so hard, but then again, those struggles made us who we are. I learned I was stronger than I knew, and I learned that you were the kind of man who does not give up even when giving up would be easier. So no, I do not think I have regrets. Everything led us here, and here is exactly where I want to be." Samuel lifted her hand to his lips and kissed it, a gesture that had become habit over their years together. "I used to think I knew what my life was supposed to be. Take over the ranch, marry someone from one of the neighboring families, raise children who would take over after me. Simple, traditional, expected. But then you showed up and nothing was simple anymore, and I realized I had been thinking too small. You taught me that life could be so much bigger, so much better than what I had imagined. You taught me I could be more than just useful," Delilah said. "My whole life, people valued me for what I could do for them. Keep books, run a household, be practical and efficient. But you valued me for who I was, not just what I could do. You made me feel seen in a way I never had before." They sat in companionable silence, watching their children and the ranch that stretched out before them. The land that had nearly been lost to drought and debt was now thriving, green and lush with the careful management and hard work they had poured into it. The buildings were well maintained, the livestock was healthy, and the whole operation hummed with the efficiency of good management and dedicated workers. Later that year, they received word that the railroad was extending a line that would run within 10 miles of the ranch. The news caused excitement throughout the county, as it meant easier transport of cattle to market and supplies to the remote ranches. Samuel and Delilah discussed the implications over dinner, with the older children contributing their thoughts. "It could change everything," James said. "We could ship cattle east without having to drive them to distant railheads. That saves time and weight loss. And we could receive breeding stock from farther away," Margaret added. "Better bloodlines to improve the herd." Samuel looked at his children, so grown up and knowledgeable, and felt pride surge through him. "What do you think, Robert? You have been quiet." Robert, at 7 years old but wise beyond his years, said thoughtfully, "I think it means the ranch will be successful for a long time." "That is good because I want to work here forever." "Forever is a long time," Delilah said gently. "You might change your mind as you get older." "I will not," Robert said with absolute certainty. "This is the best place in the world and I am never leaving." His siblings laughed, but Samuel and Delilah exchanged a look that said they understood. They had both found their forever home here, and it made sense that their children would feel the same connection to the land and the life they had known. As 1896 dawned, Samuel began teaching James the finer points of running the ranch, preparing him for eventual leadership. It was not because Samuel planned to retire anytime soon. He was only 41 and in excellent health, but because he believed in preparation. He wanted his children to be ready for whatever the future held, to have the skills and knowledge to keep the ranch thriving for generations. Delilah, meanwhile, started a small school on the ranch property, teaching not just their younger children but also the children of their employees and some neighboring families who had no other access to education. She loved teaching, loved watching young minds grow and develop, and she was good at it in the same way she was good at everything she set her mind to. The years rolled on in a pattern of seasons and celebrations, hard work and harvest, births and growth. In 1898, James announced his engagement to a girl from Sonora, a teacher's daughter named Emily who shared his love of horses. The wedding was held at the ranch, a grand affair that brought people from 3 counties to celebrate. Watching his eldest son marry reminded Samuel of his own wedding, so much simpler but no less meaningful, and he found himself tearing up as the preacher pronounced them man and wife. "Getting sentimental in your old age," Delilah teased him later as they danced at the reception. "I am only 43. That is hardly old," Samuel protested, spinning her expertly. He had learned to dance after they married because Delilah loved it and he loved making her happy. "You are right, you are not old. You are distinguished, mature, seasoned." Her eyes sparkled with mischief. "And you are definitely sentimental, but I love that about you. You feel things deeply, Samuel Pierce. Always have, even when you were trying to pretend you did not. Hard to pretend anything with you. You always see right through me," Samuel said, pulling her closer. "That is because I know you better than anyone. I have studied you for 15 years, learned all your tells and quirks and the face you make when you are trying not to worry about something." She rested her head on his shoulder as they swayed to the music. "You are my favorite subject." By the turn of the century, the ranch had expanded to over 2,000 acres, with a herd of 200 cattle and a constant rotation of horses being trained for sale. James and Emily lived in the old house, which had been renovated and expanded, and were expecting their first child. Margaret was courting a young lawyer from Helena who visited every weekend. Robert, at 12, was already talking about innovations in ranching techniques he had read about. And the twins, now 9, were inseparable troublemakers who kept everyone on their toes. Samuel and Delilah had achieved something rare. They had built not just a successful business but a genuine legacy. More than that, they had built a love story that served as an example to their children and everyone who knew them. They disagreed sometimes, of course, and there were still struggles and worries as there always were in ranching. But they faced everything together with the same partnership that had saved the ranch all those years ago. On a warm summer evening in 1900, as they approached their 17th wedding anniversary, Samuel and Delilah took a ride out to the boundary of their property, something they tried to do once a month when weather permitted. They rode in comfortable silence, the kind that came from years of knowing each other so well that words were often unnecessary. At the highest point on the ranch, with a view that stretched for miles in every direction, they dismounted and stood looking out over everything they had built. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink and purple, and the beauty of it took Samuel's breath away like it did every time. "You remember when I first showed you this view?" Samuel asked. "It was about 3 months after you arrived, and I brought you up here because I wanted you to see the ranch the way I saw it, to understand why I was fighting so hard to keep it." "I remember," Delilah said softly. "I looked out at all this land and I thought, he is not just fighting for property, he is fighting for legacy, for belonging, for home. And I understood why you could not let it go, even when letting go would have been easier. You said that day that you would help me save it, no matter what it took." Samuel put his arm around her waist. "And you kept that promise. You saved it, Delilah. You saved me, you saved this ranch, and you gave me a life I could not have imagined." "We saved each other," Delilah said, the same correction she had been making for 17 years. "That is what I keep trying to tell you, Samuel. It was not me rescuing you or you rescuing me. We were two people who needed each other, who chose each other, and who built something together that neither of us could have built alone. That is partnership. That is love." Samuel turned her to face him, cupping her face in his hands. She was 42 now, with silver threading through her auburn hair and lines around her eyes from years of squinting in the Montana sun. But she was more beautiful to him than the 25-year-old who had knocked on his door asking for work. Because now when he looked at her, he saw not just her beauty but her strength, her intelligence, her humor, her love for their children, and the 1,000 ways she made his life better every single day. "I love you," he said. I have loved you from almost the first day, and I will love you until my last day. You are everything to me, Delilah Pierce." Tears shimmered in her eyes. "And you are everything to me. You gave me a home when I had none. You gave me purpose when I was lost, and you gave me a family when I was alone. But most of all, you saw me, the real me, and you loved me anyway. That is the greatest gift anyone has ever given me." They kissed as the sun set over their ranch. Two people who had started as strangers and become partners, lovers, best friends, and soulmates. The journey from that day when Delilah arrived at a failing ranch to this moment of peace and prosperity had been long and difficult, filled with challenges and obstacles that would have defeated lesser people. But they had faced it all together, and in doing so, they had created something that would last far beyond their own lifetimes. As they rode back to the house in the gathering dusk, they could see lights in the windows, the lamps being lit by their children and grandchild who lived there now. Smoke rose from the chimney, promising a warm meal and warmer company. The corrals were full, the barn was solid, and the land stretched out around them, green and thriving and theirs. The ranch had been failing, she had arrived and given him reason to fight, and together they had won. But more than that, they had won each other, and that victory was worth more than all the land and cattle and horses in Montana. They had built a love that would echo through generations, a testament to what could be achieved when two people chose each other and refused to give up, no matter what obstacles stood in their way. And as they put the horses away for the night and walked hand in hand to the house where their family waited, Samuel thought about how a single decision, a single moment of choosing to let Delilah stay when he wanted to send her away, had changed absolutely everything. It had saved his ranch, yes, but more importantly, it had saved his heart, his soul, his capacity to hope and love and dream. That night, gathered around the dinner table with 3 generations of Pierces, Samuel raised his glass in a toast. To family, to the ranch, and most of all, to the woman who made it all possible. To Delilah, my wife, my partner, my heart. To Ma, the children echoed, and Delilah blushed with pleasure, even after all these years still not quite comfortable being the center of attention. Later, as they prepared for bed, Delilah said, "You know, sometimes I still cannot believe this is my life, that I get to wake up every day in this house, on this ranch, with you beside me and our children nearby. It feels almost too good to be true." "It is true," Samuel assured her, pulling her into his arms. "This is our life, the one we built together, and we get to live it every single day. That is not luck or chance. That is the reward for all the hard work, all the faith, all the love we put into making it happen." They fell asleep wrapped around each other, as they had every night for 17 years, secure in their love and their legacy. Outside, the Montana wind whispered through the grass, and the stars shone down on the ranch that love had saved, the home that partnership had built, and the family that would carry the Pierce name forward for generations to come. The story of Samuel and Delilah Pierce became legend in that part of Montana, told and retold as an example of what determination and love could achieve. But for Samuel and Delilah themselves, it was simply their life, the choice they made every day to love each other, to work together, and to never give up on the dreams they shared. And in the end, that choice made all the difference, transforming a failing ranch and 2 lonely people into a legacy of love that would endure long after they were gone, inspiring their children and grandchildren to believe that with the right person beside you, anything was possible.